had to do with biodiesel and filtering it and so on. But what is it that you looked for, expecting to find, and then did find with regard to hydrogen supplementation?
Well, I had been researching the reading, basically. I started out with reading all the forums, just about everything I could find. And that was back before YouTube, so it was like, the eGas forum and, what was it, OU Power? It was one of the earlier forums.
Yeah.
And
isn't it amazing that we're only talking about 6 years ago?
It seems like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that was before YouTube wasn't very big back then, so you'd go into these folders in these forums and you'd watch these little video clips, and you didn't really know what you were looking for at that time. But, so I started out with reading those things, and at that time, I didn't have a space to really work on the stuff. And so, I attempted to make a few cells, in my living room like most people do, and, they weren't all that great. They showed me that, oh yeah, you can make some hydrogen, but without really a place to do that. So then when I came to the university, still had some of the, materials that I had bought, but then suddenly I had a lab to work in. And, that another plug for not all the university people are bad, they let me, do my tests and stuff, in their facilities. And so,
what were some of the things that you actually had access to that proved useful? Any expensive equipment or?
Table saw and a drill press and a metal shear. I mean, it's basic equipment that you'd have in a machine shop. But a lot of it just
I noticed in your resume you mentioned that you have experience with gas chromatography and so on, but you didn't end up using any of that.
A lot of that stuff, my experience for that was with the biodiesel, because in order to determine what impurities are in the biodiesel, you need to do gas chromatography on it. Nothing really to do with the hydrogen, because they're all set up to do, this particular test, and I don't know enough about those equipment to make up my own, test method to measure what's in, my hydrogen cells and such.
Right.
So
wouldn't it be nice to? Wouldn't it be great to be able to do the more advanced testing that all of us would like to know what the results are?
Well, and I think that's what we need, and I've finished my master's here, and I'm, kind of looking for the next step, and, I would be really excited and interested to do, a PhD on, hydrogen boosting, primarily focused on electrolysis, not, because there's many studies where they use tank hydrogen, but I'd like to see, a PhD research on the, on this thing.
Yeah, and let me just ask you, in all the investigation that you've done, have you found any previous studies that go to these places in a thorough way?
There's that one study from Turkey.
And yet that you got through saying that wasn't that thorough, right?
Well, I should say what they published wasn't very thorough. Typically when you do a journal paper, you say exactly what your procedure was so that it can be replicated. And they didn't really, they showed basically the diagram of the setup they used and just really general stuff, and then they showed their test results, which I think one of the most important, things that we need as a, HHO industry, so to speak, is to really be really careful on our test procedures so that, when you show your data to somebody, it's unquestionable.
Yes.
And
yeah, well, because of the fact that the average person who is publishing results is not a scientist and is not submitting their evidence for peer review,
right?
It does lack any kind of, professional approach to establishing the parameters of the experiment and the results.
So basically, with my research, I started out with a basic, a replication of SMAC's first. I guess it would be his version 2 SMAC booster, and I used.
This would be with a number of switch plate covers.
I actually cut up sheets of metal, so it was a variant of it. I didn't use switch plates, but basically it would be the step cap design. Is what I used, but
in which you're not energizing the two end plates, but one of the end plates and then one of the center, or two of the end plates and one of the center plates. Is that it?
Yeah, I think the two outside plates are powered, and then there's a plate in the middle that's powered, and then he has like pairs of two plates. You know, I can't remember exactly how many. It's on probably Patrick Kelly's chapter 10, I think it is, where they actually show. But basically, the basic principles is, you know, so that was the first serious cell. I had built some, you know, basically just positive, negative parallel cells before that, which, you know, those don't produce very much gas. Then I replicated SMAC cell, and that was, you know, I was starting to see, you know, liter per minute range, and so that's where you start to get a little bit excited because this thing's actually, you know, making bubbles fairly quickly.
Yeah, a continuous stream of gas.
Mm-hmm. And so I made that cell, and then I have this little Honda scooter, and so my first real testing on a vehicle was this scooter has a compartment under the seat, and so I put a car battery underneath there with the cell, and then piped that into the intake of the engine. And when you turn that thing on, the cell on, the engine just revved up, just whoom. You know, you could just feel the, you know, the increase in power. And so, you know, I drove that around for basically a whole summer. It's kind of hard to get gas mileage data like that because the thing gets 100 miles per gallon anyways, and you're driving back and forth. So, you know, it's hard to get a lot of data like that. You know, a very significant increase in power.
In other words, you were zipping around on this scooter with an auxiliary battery providing the energy for the electrolysis chamber?
Yeah, that's correct.
And were you then charging that battery with?
Yeah, and then I would, you know, when I would be done driving, I would charge the battery. You know, it wasn't those scooters. They don't really have electrical systems, so you know, you would have a hard time probably even getting an amp of power. So, you know, so I just used the battery just as, you know, to test it.
Yeah.
And significant power increase, but, you know, the fuel economy, you know, I didn't really get it, to be honest. And the scooter did have a computer, but it's still carbureted. And so that led me to the conclusion that in order to get a fuel, you'll get the power gain. You know, I was seeing my, you know, fuel economy improvement in the power. And so if you backed off on the gasoline, I would have seen my fuel economy power. So my fuel economy increased. So I believe that, you know, I was enjoying the power increase, but in order to get fuel economy, I would have to have some way of leaning out the mixture.
Right. And so did you then run the scooter entirely on the output of a cell?
So that was the first testing. And so then, you know, I was talking to family and, you know, how I really want to research this stuff, but, you know, to buy stainless steel, you know, the correct stainless steel, I mean, that's really expensive, and then, you know, to get the right materials is expensive. So, you know, my family decided to help me do some research.
Really?
And so
well, hats off to them.
Yeah. And so the idea was that I would build a cell for their car. And so I basically did I don't know if those pictures are still up there, but on the hydroxy forum, Bob Boyce had posted pictures of a little 7-cell unit that was similar to his big cell, but it was only 7 cells. And he put that in his Prius and had significant improvement. So that was at that time, you know, I didn't really like the Taro style cell because, you know, how do you refill the thing? And
by Taro cell, we're referring to a cell that has no plexiglass box surrounding it. It's a dry cell.
Right. It's basically just you have 2 rigid end pieces, and then you have like gaskets in between the plates. And then it's hard to get fluid in there. You put a hole in the bottom. You know, typically that's the way it's done, a hole in the bottom and a hole in the top, but then you have a current leakage through that hole, and so that leads to inefficiency. So I didn't want to do that, really. And so I emailed Ed Holgate, who makes the big boxes for the big hydrogen cells, and so he sent me a slab of the spacer material for free. So I really appreciate